It is the latest model introduced in the Jewel Beetle line that's been around since the days of Medarot 2, sporting two unique motifs and a very dangerous surprise therein. It is MWB04 Aumaga, with a completely brand new kit across the board of ACG beam, double CGU missile, biped legs, and the brand new leg ability of Bullet Charge, which buffs power and success of all equipped shooting parts if the user has more equipped than the target. Additionally, will also grant a small amount of CG when using a shooting skill. Now, the MWB line has been rather unique for a number of years now, as it's actually been outwardly missing a 04 model for quite some time to contrast the Ragna 6 twins, which are 03 and 04 respectively. But that is no longer the case with Aumaga, with a very powerful CG-related kit that basically takes everything that made Aurora rather dangerous and even limited it to a point, and removes a good chunk of those limitations and makes it just a little bit more dangerous with what it brings to the table. ACG Beam on the head is a brand new skill that is an optic attribute skill, but it behaves similarly with a different kind of mechanic. Unlike Beam or Hyper Beam or anything of the like, which checks the user's charge gauge for damage bonuses, such as that 30% or that 100% for that ×2 or ×3 bonus, ACG Shot, on the other hand, instead checks the target for the incoming damage bonuses. So that means you can have virtually zero charge in your gauge, but if you're targeting somebody that has been stockpiling Metaforce for a number of turns now, as long as it meets those same thresholds, you can dish out some really nasty damage bonuses as punish for that, as a brand new skill being introduced into the CG Punish category. And with it having the ability to pierce, makes it a very dangerous skill you can use pretty easily and conventionally once the fight does drag on a good couple turns. CGU Missile on both arms is another brand new skill that is a gunpowder based skill, as expected of a missile type of attack. And as such, that does also mean that it's a gunpowder skill with a full AoE type of attack type. So that means it'll damage all the parts of the enemy normally and spread the damage equally. So that means if the target has 4 fully healthy parts, or if they are perhaps sponging the damage to somewhere else, it's going to spread and equalize the damage. However, if the enemy perhaps dodges or intercepts the attack with a missile, or with a shield, or even tries to graze it with a conceal bonus, this means that all the damage is going to be sponged to that one part instead. So something else to keep in mind. However, CGU Missile, on the other hand, grants an additional perk on top of that, as it gives a small amount of CG to the grants the CG Upper effect to self when attacking. And CG Upper, on the other hand, is a relatively new support skill we've started seeing more commonly these days. But simply explained, CG Upper buffs the amount of charge gained from any action in any way by 30%. So that means once that effect is active and you go to charge Metaforce, which is usually 30% charge, well, guess what? You're going to be getting just a little bit more on top of that when you choose to charge Metaforce with that buff active, making it extremely easy to use this as a follow-up or a precursor for a lot of stronger charge-reliant power attacks, such as, say, Beam, Hyper Beam, Hyper Laser, Beam Sword, or anything else of the like. However, it is also worth noting that given that Aumaga does have an optic and a gunpowder attribute skill, it does also mean that if the enemy brings optic guard or gunpowder guard as shields to the table, they can render him useless extremely easily, even with the added CG Upper effect that he grants to himself. Biped legs means that Aumaga is going to have relatively solid coverage across all terrains with a pretty diverse leg terrain compatibility, and his leg stats actually aren't too shabby either, relatively squishy in about 1 or 2 of them, but makes up for it in a number of different ways. His leg mobility at 888 is pretty solid, as it means he gets a pretty solid speed. He's pretty good in the speed department as far as that is concerned, and off to a very good start before any other bonuses come into effect, such as, say, Medarot bonuses or terrain bonuses. That 888 is definitely going to be helping him out where possible. An evade of 1046 is also pretty good, as it means he can dodge or graze essentially as he pleases. not going to do it all the time, but the higher above 1,000 you are, the more likely it is you can dodge or graze, as long as you don't have a no dodge penalty or ailment on you. A melee resist of 591 is definitely not great though, as this means that anyone that does manage to get up close and personal in Aumaga's space is definitely going to be making him feel the pain for it. But he does make up for it just a little bit with a shoot resist of 1038. And like I said, normally the closer to over 1,000 you get, the better you are, but I do feel in this respect, Aumaga is kind of curbing that bottom line to just barely skirt on by, because this means that while he definitely does pack some very solid power, between almost 1,500 across between two parts and over 1,600 for one of them, it does mean he's going to be very reliant on making sure nothing touches him. So a defender on the field or a healer to keep him alive and healthy is definitely going to be required. On the topic of power, like I said, it is relatively solid though. 1480 for ACG beam, right arm CGU missile at almost 1,500, and the left one at over 1,600. The heat and cool stats are actually not too bad either. Normally stronger stuff like this tends to have heat and cool in the low to mid 400 to 500, but having stuff in the mid to high 600s is actually really good, as it means you can fire these things off pretty easily and not have to worry about getting caught on the back end as a punish or even outran based on the kind of terrain and the enemy fighting. As far as armor is concerned though, he is relatively tanky there, however, with a head armor of 4,200, arms at just shy of 3,600 apiece, and legs at almost 4,100. Even though his legs resist stats means he can't reduce the damage very well, he definitely does have a fairly healthy HP. So he does have that going for him at least. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Aumaga a pretty well-rounded 7 out of 10. His kit is rather and interestingly synergetic unto itself, with the ability of Bullet Charge, which grants him power and success if the user has more shooting parts equipped, and then the extra perk of CG gained when using a shooting skill. CGU Missile, of course, as a gunpowder, means it's extremely easy for him to flush out enemy leaders with that AoE type of effect, and the charge upper effect that you get to self is also extremely nice for your charge sustain. And ACG Beam, even if it is the oddball out here as checking the enemy for charge instead of himself, it does mean that he can still fire it off as a really solid punish skill anytime that he's on the field once the battle kicks off a few turns. However, it is also worth noting, like I said, that between an optic and 2 gunpowder skills, you do want to be careful that the enemy does not have any gunpowder or optic guards equipped on the team in any capacity, because those will render him extremely harmless very, very quickly. However, it is also worth noting that he does basically guarantee bullet charge every time he's on the field as a pure set though, given that he is triple shooting, and you really can't beat that without having to match it, which, even with matching, you're still going to get the bonus anyway. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a little bit higher at an 8 out of 10 for these same reasons. ACG Beam you may or may not use super often in my personal opinion, unless you really like going for that charge punish, or even something such as, say, modifiers where enemy has full charge at start, but CGU Missile I could definitely see having some very good potential use in competitive meta, as not only would you have the chance to flush out enemy leaders quickly, but gaining that charge upper effect to self is also extremely useful for your charge reliant fighters, especially allowing them to keep a non-CG reliant attack and still synergize back into the kit. And the biped legs with bullet charge is basically just a step up from bullet rain, so if you like using bullet rain already, this is basically just a step up from that with some extra CG on use, and it kind of speaks for itself how good that can be when used as a pure set or as mixed parts across the board.